host you guys and not have you sitting out on the beach in the rain. And I am, you know, it's wonderful to work with Jeff, and we work with Jeff also on an upcoming event that I wanted to tell you about, the Provincetown Book Festival, which is September 29th, 30th, and October 1st, to that weekend. And we have Il-Yan Wu, who wrote Master, Slave, Husband, Wife, about the escape of black slaves before the Civil War, about how they escaped posing as a master and his slave. And it's a fabulous story, and she will tell not only the story, but how she discovered it. And anyway, we're going to have 19 different rather prestigious authors talking about their books with each other in interesting pairings, and I hope you guys can come. You can go to provincetownbookfestival.org, and there's also brochures on the table. And now, Jeff.
Thank you. Thank you. My trusty assistant, Nico. Well, I want to thank Nan and the library, Amy and the rest of the gang here for letting us come at the last minute. As I was eyeing the weather here, the beautiful waterfront event that I had hoped our lovely guests could experience along with the rest of us just was not going to happen. So, you know, I rushed over here, and Nan and Amy said yes to let us come in here, so we're very grateful for that. And for people that are, we have the same situation happening on Tuesday the 29th with the legendary Bob Mackey. That event's going to be here as well because of the weather projection on Tuesday. And I guess it's out of turn for my remarks, but I should mention anyway that event will be at 5 p.m. unlike our normal events which are at 6, and that's because at 7:30 Marilyn May is performing at the Provincetown Art Society at a special benefit, and a bunch of us have tickets, including Bob Mackey. We're all going to go from this event over to that event. So if you want to support the Provincetown Art Society, if you go onto their website, I think there's still a few tickets left for this. There's going to be a reception there as well. And if you haven't seen her perform, she's amazing. So that'll be happening on the 29th, so that'll be at the beach as well. Okay, so I wanted to say that we're happy. East End Books Ptown is happy to welcome everyone to this very special event with authors Christy Cashman, Stelios Mormoris, and our special guest, actress Jane Seymor. We're all very excited about it. And I will say that I said in some of the comments on Facebook, because there's been a lot of comments about this event and Jane coming, and regarding Jane, people were talking about, of course, how much they love Dr. Quinn as a woman, and which we all do. And I put a comment on there that I agree, but I absolutely love Somewhere in Time, one of my most favorite, one of the most romantic movies ever from 1980 with Christopher Reeve, which is just incredible. And then I had recently watched it twice, the new Acorn series, Harry Wilde, which Jane is incredible in this. Yeah. She's in everything. It's like, so exciting, but really it's such talented people here. And I hope maybe you're here at least till tomorrow. Maybe, I think there's sunshine tomorrow. Isn't there? Maybe
No. The day after.
The day after. Oh well, sorry. We got to get you back. That's what it means.
Definitely.
And I think there possibly could be a film in the future that'll be a film festival here. So I think she will be back. Yes. We can't discuss that yet. Anyway, we have signed copies of books that will be available tonight, and they'll be in the bookstore also. So if you're watching the live stream, or like a lot of people watch it, the recording later, you'll be able to get signed copies of the book at that time. So, in addition to thanking the library and everybody, I'd like to also let you know about an update about our Boston bookstore. So there's two stories this week, one in Axios News about it, and we can finally say, oh my God, that the store is going to be opening mid to late October. Our contractor has given us, they've broken ground, and we're very excited about that. It's a much larger store. It's next to the ICA Museum, and in the same building that my business partner and friend, Kristen Canty's restaurant, Woods Hill Pier 4, is located. So we hope you'll come visit. We actually have events in September and October, but they'll be on the second floor of 300 Pier 4, the event space of the building. So the next event there in Boston is September 14th with award-winning authors Julia Glass and Tom Perrotta, with a reception catered by Woods Hill Pier 4. So, and all of our events coming up that you'll see will be on the second floor until we get our certificate of occupancy, but we're very excited about that. So I wanted to show one thing, and my associates and Kristen wanted to make sure I don't forget this, and so I'll put it right in front of the live stream. We were very thrilled to find out that the state of Massachusetts, we got accepted through the 3 rounds of selection processes to raise money with Patronicity, which is a crowdfunding site. And so basically, there's a program called Biz Empower that the Mass Development Corporation has, and it supports true small indie businesses. And so what this means, if we're successful, we have a short period of time to do it, and if we can raise $20,000, then we get a grant of $40,000. So that doubles that. Is that doubling? Yes. The amount. So, and it all goes to the construction and the stores. So if anyone's inclined to do that, any amount will be helpful, because we have to meet 2 criteria. One is raise $20,000, but we also have to get at least 20 people involved. So like if some generous person wants to give us $10,000, that's great, but I still need to get 20 donors. So we're very excited about that. The wine and tapas bar part of the store will open a little later. We're getting the bookstore open first, and we're just very thankful for that. So, so I want to tell you a little bit about our 3 guests here. None of them want the long description. At any event, they're so amazing, and it's all on our website, the incredible descriptions about these 3 people and what they're involved with. Had I had enough notice, I would have had Jane's books here. So I'm very sorry that I don't, but we will have it. So Christy Cashman. Christy Cashman is an American author, actress, and producer who's appeared in more than 20 films, including Kettle of Fish, The Love Guide, American Hustle, Joy, The Descendants, Ted 2, The Women, The Golden Boys, and The Forger. She's also written 2 children's books set in Ireland, The Not So Average Monkey. You'll have to help me.
Kilkee-Cow.
Thank you. People who watch these live streams know I'm famous about my bad pronunciations of names. And Petrie's Next Things. The Truth About Horses is her first novel. Christy lives with her husband Jay and her two sons, Jay Michael and Quinn. There are 3. Quinn, really?
Quinn's here. Quinn's
Where's
there.
Quinn? Oh, Quinn. Have you been to the Quinn house?
I have, yeah.
For the first time.
Ken is design.
Went the other
really?
night.
Oh, funny. Oh, great. Oh, cool. And there are 3 dogs, Ben, Dan, and Violet, and 3 horses, Calvin.
Lucy.
It says Violet. I'm reading this is from your publisher.
We don't have a Violet.
As far as you know.
Right from the publisher. It's beyond the mispronunciation. It's just wrong information.
Wrong name.
Well, hopefully the horses are correct. Calvin, Butterscotch, and Victor.
Yeah.
Okay. I want to meet Butterscotch. When Christy's not writing or working on production projects, she's most likely riding her horses or spending time with her dogs. The family divides their time between Kilkea Castle in Ireland and their homes in Chatham and Boston. Truth About Horses, a little bit about that. Following her mother's sudden death, 14-year-old Reese and her father lose one another, as well as their family horse business, and go on a separate grief-stricken paths. In this tender tale of not giving up hope, Reese meets a selective mute and decides to trust a force beyond explanation to run the race her mother always knew she could. This is a beautiful book, and I encourage everybody to read it. It's phenomenal. And I think you probably should read it soon, because I hear things about maybe it's going to be on some screen somewhere at some point. So, Stelios Mormoris is a resident of Boston and Martha's Vineyard, and formerly lived in Paris most of his life. Boy, that's wrong. Working as an executive in the beauty industry. Stelios is currently Chief Executive Officer of Scent Beauty Incorporated. He studied architecture at Princeton, where he received his BA, and he received his MBA from
NZN.
Thank you, sir. Of course, in France. He has held positions on the boards of the French Culture Center of Boston, ACT UP, Historic New England, and the Fragrance Foundation. He's also a contemporary artist, specializing in abstract oil painting. His interests range from rugby to sailing to gardening, while continuing his passion for reading and writing poetry. The Oculus is his brilliant debut collection of poetry. I strongly encourage you to purchase that as well. And I should say, for probably nobody here knows, but I do know a lot about poetry. I, for years, was publisher of Anhinga Press. It's one of the oldest poetry presses, and this book is phenomenal. So it's not just that he's here that I'm saying it, it really is quite good. So it's poems of muscular power that reveal the rich vistas that surround us all, in which the humble objects of everyday life become divine, while the divine is humbled and humanized. Sun-dappled yet clear-eyed, foliate yet spare, pensive yet erotic, Stelios Mormoris, the Oculus, binds together tense oppositions to create poems of nearly muscular power. They fill themselves with the vitality of a life lived fully, brimming with experience and rife with memory. And this is from Dan Beachy-Quick, the author. Okay. Now, our esteemed moderator, Jane Seymor, multiple Emmy and Golden Globe winner, recipient of the Officer of the British Empire, OBA, bestowed upon her by Queen Elizabeth II at Buckingham Palace. Jane has proven her talents in virtually all media, the Broadway stage, medicine, motion pictures, and television. As iconic star of the beloved TV series Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman, she became a role model to young women and girls throughout the world with her inspiring rendition of a woman who can courageously dare, achieve, and improve anything a man can do, investing it with that woman's touch of caring humanity. So Seymor has reached success with a star career encompassing international movie stardom with such lasting films as Somewhere in Time, the beautiful film from 1980, with a fantastic soundtrack as well. Broadway and London stage acclaim, including creating the role of Costanza and Amadeus, and television achievements and award-winning performances in War and Remembrance, East of Eden, and of course, so many other movies, so many other shows. So the beloved series of Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman, still airs around the world in over 90 different countries. Her now classic turn in The Wedding Crashers paired her with Vince Vaughn and Owen Wilson playing the sexually charged wife of Christopher Walken, and changed the industry landscape for Seymor, showcasing her comedy skills to a broad audience that quickly embraced the acting range that Seymor exhibited. Suddenly, she became a go-to star for memorable guesting spots on top award-winning comedy shows like How I Met Your Mother and Jane the Virgin. Many of you probably have seen, or if you haven't, you need to see it ASAP, the beautiful series Harry Wild on Acorn TV, which I watched twice. It's just fantastic. She's amazing in it. And I will say to you also that hopefully you'll see at film festivals next year a brilliant short film, which I can't mention any more about, but that watch for it, and I predict it'll be at the Provincetown International Film Festival. So without further ado, I give you to Jane and our wonderful guests. And thank you so much for coming. They'll be signing books afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you. We have two very creative forces of nature here with us, and before they were authors, they led very, as we've heard, accomplished creative lives. How did your previous experience impact your books?
Me?
Yes.
Ladies first.
Okay.
I'll be a lady later.
First, I just want to point out that obviously Steve got into poetry because he wanted to make a bunch of money.
We've discussed that. Good.
But yeah, I think that everything that I have done so far before writing had all informed my writing of this novel and other things that I worked on. From film stuff, I think it helped me to write more visually when I wrote. I mean, I'd written some screenplays, I read a lot of screenplays, I worked on films, and I think that really helped me with writing visually. And then of course life experiences, trying to extract those very vulnerable moments when when you feel like all's lost, I suppose, and incorporating that into my writing was helpful as best I could.
Yeah, For me, it's interesting because I published a book of poetry at 65 years old. So this is a mature evolution of my creativity. When I started writing as a teenager, I was writing because I love poetry, I love literature, I love Shakespeare, I love Byron, I love Shelley, I love modern poets. And then when I was at Princeton, I studied poetry with some very, mentioning Christy, Joyce Carol Oates, who was my professor, believe it or not, who's still alive and strong. Many Stanley Kunitz and William Meredith, and I love the English language. I love the creativity in poetry, a new way to experience language, sound. But for me, my life took off in a direction as a career businessman. I was a professional rugby player, believe it or not, in my late 30s, early 40s in France. I had many chapters of my life, but interestingly, privately, and I think there's a question later referring to this, I was writing poetry in my own corner, and as my life went on, my experiences obviously influenced what I was writing about. And I can say today, and the reason the Oculus is so meaningful for me, it's kind of an amalgam of all these different chapters of my life, from my childhood to the struggle of succeeding in business, living all over the world, and actually, interestingly, living in the beauty industry, which has its own kind of code, visual vocabulary, if you will. And I would say what's interesting for me is my writing is just simply a patchwork of all the different experiences of my life. It's not a conscious process. It's not like I'm writing thinking about what influences me, but when I look back at the work once it's written, I realize so much of it still comes out of personal experience.
Well, you were both very covert about your writing in the beginning. Why do you think that was?
We were scared.
Yeah, scared, definitely. Yeah, I was working a long time on this novel before I actually told people that I was writing a book, and I think because it was scary for me to come out and say, because I wasn't even necessarily convinced that I had something important to say, and I had to kind of, convince myself every day that I did. And that's not so easy, when you're working on something creative. I think it's really difficult to wake up every day and say, oh yeah, this whatever's happening in your head right now is going to be worthwhile to put, on paper and make a book. So I think that not telling people was partly just about being scared for me, and then eventually I think I felt like I had to, because people wonder what you're doing all those hours in there, right?
Hunched over your desk.
Yeah. For me, it was in the gazebo in our backyard, but.
No, for me, it's interesting. For me, because I had so many different interests, I'd say the reason I was quote unquote covert about my writing first was, I think when you're a writer, and any artist, you do have muses, you do have mentors, and you hold them in high esteem. You hold them on a sort of pedestal. And I think when you're a serious writer, you're always probably thinking of yourself in relationship to your mentors and your muses, and that's a very hard act to follow. And you wonder, as you are kind of wading into any artistic medium, are you as good as the people you admire and like? So I think part of, for me,
true, yeah.
was I was afraid of just not being good enough. Like, am I a good enough writer? And it takes a lot of, I'd say, input, friends, support systems to get you to a place where you feel confident enough to write. I'm sure Christy experienced that. Mm-hmm. So that was one reason.
And that was Grub Street. Grub Street for me was the place where it felt safe. The writing organization in Boston. Yeah. That was the place that made me feel like it was a classroom environment, and everybody was in the same position. Everyone was just sort of starting off, trying to get their work out there. So that was a safe place.
Yeah, I think writing is, you are vulnerable. Like for the Oculus, it's a strange story. So during COVID, I was writing, and at this point I'm in my my studio in Martha's Vineyard, you know, watching the leaves blow too many times, and squirrels running and deer running, and you know, going to farms for food because everyone's afraid to be out in public, and I was kind of going stir crazy. And I told my partner, I said, well, I was accepted at a writers conference in Williamstown, Massachusetts in the middle of COVID, and I'm gonna go, I'll be tested. And it oddly, so I show up at this campus in the middle of nowhere, North Adams, Massachusetts, Tupelo Presses, and there are 8 poets. I'm of the 8 they chose, I was the only one with no published books, no background in poetry, and the staff of Tupelo Press is like, well, we're gonna have everyone work on their manuscripts, but the best manuscript will be published. So I was extremely intimidated, you know, the poetry critic for the New York Times and the head of the creative writing program at University of Iowa, and I was thinking, oh shit, Lee, there's no way I'm going to survive this. And interestingly, in that community, there was huge amount of support and huge amount of, I'd say, openness among other writers and the editors, and it pushed me to publish a book, which they accepted to be published, obviously. So you go through a lot of, you know, a lot of hurdles to come out of hiding, to come out, as they say, even as a writer, and I'm very glad I did.
When did you start writing The Oculus?
So The Oculus is a mix of poems from, honestly, 40 years ago, all the way to the present. And one of the hardest things about this book was not just the writing, but it was the organization of the material. And then, and of course, working with editors who were sometimes quite brutal. They're like, this is terrible, and this is really good. And organizing a narrative arc. It took a long time, but I was trying to create a kind of cohesive order of poems that made sense within a theme. Yeah. But yeah, I'd say the first poem written in here was written in probably 1985.
Wow.
So what made you, what did you tell yourself, I'm doing it now, I'm going to put it together now, or did somebody say, come on, Stelios, it's time to put it together?
I think, Jane, I think I was in a writers conference with a lot of competitive people and kind of very tough editors, and they said, you've got to put together your manuscript. And I literally was practically just taking old manuscripts I wrote from 40 years ago, some from 10, and new ones, and mixing them up. So it all came together, but it was quite a process.
So Christy, you're not just an author, you're a mother, a producer, and a philanthropist. When did you figure out that you wanted to write? Did somebody tell you should do it, or do you just tell yourself?
I finally convinced myself that I needed to do it. Actually, I had that conversation with Jay the other day, that it was sort of interesting how it all happened. And he had always told me that if you really want to take something seriously, you have to really focus. And I was the worst at wanting to have so many different things going on. I guess it's just the state of, I guess ADD or whatever it is. I wanted to have, a screenplay in development. I wanted to have a film in pre-production, production, all different stages. I wanted to be optioning books. And I thought that was the route that was best, and just to have a little production company that had a lot of things going on. But all that really did was kind of make me scattered and not focused. And so I think that when I started, the first step was signing up for classes for me, and that was the first sign to myself that I was taking myself seriously as a writer. The next step was stopping all of the BS and just really focusing on the one thing, because I just don't have that brain to be able to do. I can multitask to some level, but not to the level of having many creative projects going on at once. And so I did myself a favor by just saying, okay, I'm going to focus on this novel, and that's all I'm going to do. And I'm glad that I did.
You've already proven yourself with your children's books, though.
Well, no, the children's books were exercises for me in the process of writing my novel. So the children's books, somebody had said to me while I was in the middle of writing my novel, they said the best thing you can do when you've got writer's block or you're kind of stuck is to try to write a children's book, because it really makes you distill down your story and to be able to tell a story without all of the, you know, subplots going on and everything like that, but it kind of frees up your brain and it brings the playfulness back into writing and that sort of thing. And so, so I did that, and it worked. It really helped me with the novel writing to try writing a couple children's books. And so I did that in the middle of writing the novel.
How did you actually start to write with horses?
It was inspired by my, you know, growing up with horses, I grew up I was born in Ohio. We had horses in our backyard, basically. I'm the 9th of 10 kids, and the connection to the horses was really, really strong for me as a kid, and it just never went away. And I think that all the books that I read when I was growing up, My Friend Flicka, all of the, you know, Margaret O. Henry stories, Misty at Chincoteague, and all of them were, even The Red Pony was influential for me as a writer. So I think that the life experiences with horses combined with the literature that I read as a kid was just, something was brewing, I guess.
Stelios, the framework or architecture of writing poetry. Tell us about that.
Interesting question. So, American poetry is probably, as you know, very alive and well. You know, this is a language. American English actually has an extremely rich vocabulary, which American poets rely on for the type of textural signature and uniqueness that many other languages don't have as much, I would say. But what's interesting about now in poetry, and when I started writing poetry in the 70s to now, is of course the constant reinvention of free verse. I think a lot of that, by the way, has risked creating poetry that's inaccessible, that's very arcane or very difficult to understand. But there have always been, throughout this sort of within American writing, this reinvention of free verse, there's always been returns to formal structure. And in my book, and the way I write, I think Christina Marie Darling, the editor-in-chief of Tupelo Press, said I'm a neoclassic poet. I'm not sure whether that's related to my Greek heritage or to the actual poetry, or both. But I would say what's interesting about American poetry is that there are always the historic forms you can rely on, like the sonnet or the villanelle, which is a French form, or a sestina, or half rhymes. Meter and verse is still alive in a lot of poetry. But what's going on in American poetry now, which is fascinating, is that there is a mix of free verse and more formal verse. And I think there is an architecture, I'd say, in American poetry today. In my poetry, there is an architecture which is subtle, which reveals itself upon multiple readings. There's a poem in my book called Zeus, about my dog, a dog, which is a series of couplets that are half rhyme, but you wouldn't really notice it until you reread the book. So I think the architecture of American poetry particularly is a mix of formalism and free verse that basically collides. And that's what I would say defines American poetry today.
Who's your favorite poet?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Well, it's like one of those things, like, what's your favorite movie? Well, I love, of course, Yeats, William Butler Yeats. Always the Irish have the great mastery of language. I love, of course, Mary Oliver. It's very specific to Provincetown, who is obviously a legendary poet who writes about nature in a very philosophical and metaphysical way. I love so many poets. I'm probably more of a reader than a writer, but I admire Elizabeth Bishop, who's a modernist who came out in the 30s and 40s. I studied with Stanley Kunitz, who I didn't realize at the time was like an amazing poet. But there are many, many. Marc Doty from Provincetown is an amazing, accomplished lyrical poet. But I have many. But I have to say, William Butler Yeats was sort of my beginning of my mentorship, if you will, in poetry.
What's the framework of writing a novel?
In terms of structure, I worked with a graph. I looked at the W graph that some of you may have heard of, and put in my plot points, and and then wrote the beats in as well, and then threw it away and started over again many times. But it helped. It was helpful for me to see an actual structure, and I work with both. I like the graph. There are many, and then I work with a timeline as well. A timeline is just important because if you're writing a novel, sometimes it's hard to remember exactly where the person is in a timeline. In the book that I'm writing now, I'm really playing with time a lot. I'm circling back, and then I'm going forward, and then I'm going back even further, and then forward, back again further, and then forward again. So that's going to be a lot of keeping track of, which is going to be a whole different scenario than this book. But a timeline is helpful for me, as well as a graph.
Well, I read your book because you gave it to me when I was in Ireland doing the show.
Very wild.
And it was this thick, and I just said, I didn't actually have the heart to tell Christy. I just said, but
She didn't even
basically-
pack it with her.
No, I mean, I get
Just
given books all the time. Will you write about this? Will you write about that? And if you're learning 9 pages a day, it's pretty much impossible because you have to focus on what you're focusing on. And I don't want to. So I usually just say no, but this thing was just sitting there, and it's heavy.
Glaring at you.
It weighed 15 pounds, and I couldn't take it back. I didn't have a suitcase to take
It was
back.
before it was printed. It was
Oh,
a
God.
manuscript form, and so
And
it
I-
was huge.
That's the one you
And I
gave
just
me.
thought,
Yes.
I've got to be nice.
I've got
to
that
her
as well.
because she's a really nice lady. She does amazing things philanthropically, and I will read it. And also, being of a certain age, unless I read it all in one go, if I put it down, I don't remember it 2 days later. I got that in the brain, out of the other ear. So I read it, and I went, whoa. Wait a minute, this isn't just another book, this is actually really, really good. And so I told her that, and then she asked me to come and do this with her, and I thought, oh dear, I remember it was really good, but do I really remember it well enough to moderate? So I was on the airplane coming to Boston, 4 days ago?
Yeah.
It was so embarrassing. I mean, I'm sitting there, and I've got, the glass of wine on the doily, and the water on the doily, I've got the reading glasses on like this, I'm reading the book, and the doilies are just not enough to wipe away the tears. I was laughing and crying, and I did not put it down. I read it cover to cover in the entire flight, and the attendant said, what are you reading? Because we're big readers, and whatever you're reading, we have to have. So
Thank you.
I
That
just
was
have
good
to say,
advertising.
I am in love with the book, and it hit a nerve for me. So when she told me it was for young adults or for teens, I think you're wrong. I mean, it is for them, but it's way more than that. I think it's very impactful to me. I would imagine it would be very impactful to anyone who's lost a spouse or is dealing with a father-daughter relationship. I mean, there's just so many elements in there. Whether you love horses or not, it's much bigger than that, although I love
Thank you.
horses too. So
Thank you.
it
Thank
says
you,
here, would you like to read an excerpt?
Would you?
Would you?
It says here, would
That
you?
was, you're asking for trouble with
Oh,
us.
you mean you're asking me if I'd like to read it? She did this to me the other day.
Steve, why don't you go
All right,
first
Yeah,
while
you
I
go
find
So
this?
I'll read a poem. This is a poem called Mimosa, the first poem in my first book. It's about mental illness, actually. You cut me, poured water over wounds, blossoming flames. A slick of rainbow flowed over contours of the flesh. Outside, as it curled into the fabric of lawn chair, you were a bubble of air rising in a water glass. And the word that once refused to be spoken as you lifted my limp fingers like unwatered stems rose like the airborne flower of mimosa, pale as blush. It hovered in the stipple glare of the winter sun until you placed 2 fingers on my lips to hush, took me by the hand into the garden to stand before the greening lawn as if it were a well, and said my name.
I mean, I'm happy to read it.
I think you do such a better job. I mean, I like that excerpt we read the other day. Do you like that one?
Yes. Which one have you read to? Blind. Literally blind. Okay.
Where is it? That's the question. Oh, here it is. If you read, if you start
Okay.
here.
Okay. I lightly press my right heel into Treasure's side. I can feel his muscles collect, his big floating stride moving up, down, up, down, up, down. I can picture where we are in the field, but I can't tell if we're nearing the fence line or drifting towards the river. Am I staying in the circle, I ask? Yep, you're doing just great. Keep going. Wes wants you to change leads through the center. Suddenly, I can feel where the center is. I can feel the amount of pressure I need to press my leg, and I can tell how the slightest pull with my rein will signal Treasure to move across the ring we've created. As I sit here, blindfolded, I remember what Zadie's mom said. When your sight is taken away, you have to rely on something else. And now I think I know what she meant. When there is no light, no one to show you the way, that's when you grow. Because you have to rely on something more than what you know. Something beyond what you understand. Even more than what you believe. I shorten my rein and keep a slow, steady canter. I can picture Treasure's movement, his shoulders going forward and back. My body relaxes. I can feel each stride, but also everything between the strides. Each movement slows down for me. When Treasure reaches his legs forward, I know to bend my arms to give more rein. I can feel him stretch out and gather his legs beneath him. I can feel the slightest change. I reach my arms forward and let Treasure use his neck. And then, when he leaves the ground, I am right there with him. I can feel exactly what I need to do. Wahoo! Lexi yells. Woohoo! Wes sets up more jumps. We sail over every fence in the field, and I feel like we could jump over anything. Anything.
I suppose that excerpt could have used a little bit of a setup. It's when,
Treasure's a horse.
yeah, Treasure is first off, but Reese, the protagonist, is afraid to jump. She's sort of lost her guts about that, and so Wes, the trainer, blindfolds her because he also had been training a girl who was blind, and so Reese learned that she'd already felt that most of riding was about feeling, and a lot of times what you're looking at is you're easy to be afraid of it. It's easy to be afraid of what you see as opposed to just trust, and so that's what that whole scene is about.
So, Stelios and Christy, I think it's safe to say that your books were already a hit. Yours is a hit, and this one's #1 on Amazon, by the way.
Wow.
#1. What advice can you give to anyone who says, I want to write a book, but how do I go about it?
All right, well, one, it's not easy, like anything worth doing, it's not easy. I'd say one clear piece of advice is you have to have an idea that comes from a place of truth. I do think a lot of people very cavalierly say, I'm gonna write this, I'm gonna write that. But it's very easy as a writer to have like kind of your thoughts polluted with other people's ideas, other things that are not very essential to who you are and what you want to say. So I think, Christy referred to this before. I think you have to have an idea that comes from a place of truth for who you are, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. And I think starting there is a great place because you can very confidently create a body of work. And I think readers can always smell authenticity in writing. And I think if you embark on that journey, and I believe embark on that journey with a knowledge of writing and the history of writing, I think you can find an audience.
I think you're spot on. I think authenticity is everything. For the reader, for any art form, it's when it's authentic, it communicates, and this book so communicates with so many. What about you? What's your advice?
Well, I'm going to steal what somebody told me one time. They said, just write. You know, write a page a day, write for 15 minutes a day. I think you have to churn out a lot of stuff before you get to something meaningful. And so if you're not, it's just going to take longer. If you're not just writing every day and writing thoughts and journaling and everything, it's just, you know, it's like I guess it's like a muscle, you know, that in working out in the gym, you have to keep using it.
Your book somehow succeeds in speaking to everyone of all ages. The dialogue is pitch perfect and often very funny, and the characters are diverse and original. There's a series of twists that lead to an unexpected and mysterious conclusion. Can you share some secrets about your writing process? I mean, you've already talked about it, but
Yeah.
how long did it take you to write? And how helpful to the process is it to let trusted readers see your early drafts?
Well, from the time I started, it's been 9 years, so that's a long time. But worth it, you know. I think that it just took what it took, and hopefully my second book won't take quite that long. But my process was sometimes putting it down for months at a time. My process started with, as I mentioned, taking lots and lots of classes and just going from one class to the next and making sure that I was writing every day as much as I possibly could. And then as far as letting readers read it, taking the classes at Grub Street was helpful, but I also had two very good mentors, Betsy Horst and Arthur Vanderbilt, who I gave early drafts to, really early raw material, and they were really helpful and just encouraged me to keep going. And when I heard it from them, I believed them. I just believed, you know, that they were right. And so I thought, maybe I have something here, and I continued on.
Well, I grew up in a home with people who really appreciated the arts, and I was, my father was a major reader, and I had that. None of them actually were artists, though. What was your childhood like, and were you encouraged, or did you fight the voice telling you to create?
Steve?
I was, so I have both my parents are Greek. My mother was Greek American, born here, but of course spent much of her life in Greece. And my father was born in Greece, so I was born to very educated, cultured parents with a global view of the world. What was interesting to me is my mother was extremely literate, and when I was very young, was always leaving books on my bed. I mean, to the point it was annoying, you know, where I'd come home and like, there was a book of Khalil Gibran, the prophet, believe it or not. And not only did she leave books on my bed, she would literally go through them and highlight passages with notes. So I guess this is a subtle way of like, read what I've read. And it was interesting because as a teenager, I was like rebellious, you know, it's like, oh, here we go again. You know, I remember she left A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, which of course is a beautiful story. But I was really amazed how, as a woman who grew up in a Greek home where they spoke Greek, she was so literate and understood American and English literature. So I grew up with a mother who valued writing, reading, the Holy Bible, and that kind of immersed me in a love for language and storytelling. My father was European, educated in Switzerland, actually grew up in a home in Greece where they spoke French as their first language, not Greek. And I'd say his influence on me was just the beauty of the world, the larger world. So I wouldn't say I sort of approach what I was writing about, while it's very American style, what I write about is about the world. So I think those influences were very significant. I feel lucky I had parents that way, whether they intended to or not, who gave me this kind of fertile background to write.
Chrissy?
Well, I grew up in a really big family, the 9th of 10 kids, and my parents were big readers, my mom especially. She read us, as kids, she read us all the Narnia series, and she was always reading and always reading to us and always leaving books for us. I'm named after Catherine Marshall's book, Christy, actually. And my dad loved poetry. My dad always, we were always memorizing poetry. He was always having us memorize certain, different poems I remember. And then I think as far as a big family goes, our television broke when I was 5, and my dad decided not to fix it. And so we had to entertain ourselves. And so we would put on skits. We would do, my brothers and I would do the news. We'd pretend to be news broadcasters.
It was the double-edged sword of writing, and Christy may have at least I go into a vortex. Like when I start writing poems and poetry, literally, I would wake up in the morning and like run to my laptop, like to start writing, revising. So it becomes a very all-consuming thing. It's sort of possibly like painting, where you're in the middle of a canvas and you need to fine-tune and refine. But anyway, Perishable is, I think it's a great piece of work for me, very meaningful, and it's coming out in April from Tupelo Press, and it makes me realize that I have the fire in me to continue to write till the very end, which is nice to think about.
I'm working on another novel called Beulah, and it's set in the Smoky Mountains in Tennessee in the 80s. And basically, the first page is you find out a girl goes to high school and finds out that a girl from the high school has gone missing. And so it's sort of about a town that's gripped in fear. It's about the gentrification of the South in the Smoky Mountains. And it's about a girl who thinks she has to rescue everyone else, but finds out really she has to rescue herself. I've been working on that pitch for a while.
I like it.
So I guess we ask any questions. Do we have any questions in the audience here? Yes.
Of course, you're both writers, thus you create and tell a story, but they're both, as a poet and a novelist, very different genres. Whereas the novelist can use as many words, paragraphs, sentences as they want to convey mood, setting, action. The poet has to be so terse and concise. What drew you to each of your genres?
What was that last part of the question? Sorry.
What drew you?
Oh, what drew us
to to our genre? Well, I'm not sure. Doing what Christy did for me just seems, for me, like a colossal undertaking, like running up and down the stadium steps 100 times. I kind of am afraid of that. So I admire you for having written such a volume. But I'm not sure. I think for me, poetry, and you're right, is about being very terse and edited and creating enjambment in language, which gives you surprising tonal effects. All this, I think that I think poetry for me is just something that I was interested in very, very young, and continue to do. And I would argue, for me in my life, having had another whole career, running companies and doing that, it was harder for me to imagine taking the time out to actually write a novel, for example. Maybe one day I would, whereas poetry, interestingly, was something I can do and slip into parts of my life and do well when I was traveling or working. So I would probably say I kind of, by default, ended up in that genre.
Well, two books that I'd read right before starting to work on this were Dave Eggers' The Heartbreaking Work of Staggering Genius and The Cold Sassy Tree, and I'm forgetting who wrote The Cold Sassy Tree, but they both had very, very strong voices. And I remember when this was sort of percolating for me, I felt like the challenge was going to be, not the challenge, because it ended up being the easier part for me, was having the voice, but the important part was going to be having a really strong voice for my novel. And I felt like once she came out, Reese, I was like, okay, I think I have something to go with here. And then she became this character for me that wasn't me, of course, but like I could just sort of decide, well, how would Reese respond to this? What would she do? What would Reese do in this situation? If her father did this, or if a horse did that, or some guy started running the barn again, what would she do?
So this is a bit like an acting, a sort of an improv on a theme, or an improv on a character.
I think improv is very helpful in writing. Absolutely, yeah.
I have a question for Steve. When you were at Princeton, did you know a Jim Mustick by chance?
No.
Okay.
Who is that?
Quick question.
He's a bookseller. He now runs Apple Books. He had his own.
I'd love to meet him.
He had his own company, Common Reader, and it was a monthly reader before 9/11, and then people started buying books online, and it kind of folded. But he was at Princeton, he's probably around your age.
Okay,
Yeah, okay, just thought I'd throw that out.
thank you.
But thank you all three of you, I just, it's been charming.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah,
Thank you.
sure.
Thank you.
All right.
That's
Any
it?
other questions with a,
Oh, we have a question here. Nico.
Nico.
One of the younger members of the audience.
Yes.
Thank you all for being here. It's really insightful. My question is more about like knowing when you're done. I'm someone who
Oh.
toys with writing and painting, and I never know when to be done, and I often find myself overworking things. So as like into, I would say, very different styles of writing, of poetry and novels, how do you know when you're done? Like, because you can fluff it and mess with it and change it forever. What do you have, like an external voice tell you that? Do you have an internal voice say, hey, we're good here? Is the editor, like, how do you know?
Christy.
Actually, the process itself is helpful in knowing, because you have, once you have a rough draft, then you go through and you do a more polished draft. And then you go through and you do edits. And then you go through and you do revisions. So actually having those very specific phases that are already kind of mapped out for you, and for any author, it just, that's very helpful. So if you think of it that way, that in some ways writing is always rewriting, and some of it stays in from the very raw material, and some of it gets reworked and changed, but each phase really helped me in as I went along in understanding that.
Yeah, I love the question. 'Cause what I've learned about poetry is it is, and Christy alluded to this, it is an ongoing writing. It is actually very common, believe it or not, if you read a lot of great writers, the version you see printed in 1962 has slightly changed in 75, it's slightly changed in 78. So they do look at their work as living organisms that are always subject to revision. But I would say in poetry, which is highly precise, for me, one of the things I do, of course, is the genesis. It's like the outpouring, it's the stuff on the page. And in poetry, I would say 90% is revision and 10% is creation. And the revision process is quite like painstaking, actually. In my mind, I feel a poem's done when it is clear, and for me, that it speaks with a great clarity. It's generous to the reader in that it's saying something as clearly as possible within the context of the poem, and that's not always easy. I mean, my editor, it's like, Stelios, don't put two adverbs together, don't put an adjective, take out, don't do it is, amp up your verbs, all this stuff that many writers deal with. So sometimes you test your poetry, and actually Christy mentioned about voice. Really good poetry has an intense voice, and that voice can be quietly intense or aggressively intense. But I think finding the voice and getting the voice to be strong is success. And I think that's also part of the revision, is just realizing this is the voice, and then it's done.
That's good. Good answer. We have one more
Yeah,
thing.
I'm wondering if both of you, it's your first book that you published, right? And you're also in the middle or starting, you're in progress for your second. So I'm wondering if that also has something to do with when you're done, that you have a sense that you're done because your head is already starting to move forward into something else.
Yeah, definitely. I think I have a feeling, I hope it's true, that as I continue to write now, going into my 60s, it just gets a little easier. I think I know my own mind a little better now that I've done the first book. So the second book feels a little easier in terms of understanding those impulses, like when something's finished or when something feels right, or, having a first book under your belt does give you, I think, a lot of momentum to continue.
Yeah. I mean, after 9 years of a lot of nights going to bed thinking what's going to happen, or how do I do this, how do I bring how do I bring this subplot in and bring this character? How do I, have resolution? What do I do? I mean, after almost 9 years of going to bed thinking about it, I think I would go into a really deep depression if I didn't have something else to go. My brain wouldn't know what to do.
Withdrawal.
So it's actually a little bit, because I think there is a little bit of like what do I do? That's taken up so much of my time and my thought, my energy and identity, and so now what? But I am happy. I'm grateful that it's at this stage and I'm able to focus on something else. Really happy that I have something else to go and dive into.
We had a question online here to all three of you, although I suspect that it's slightly different for Jane's answer, which is, of course, not asking you anything, Jane, about movies or anything like that, about books, but it's all three of you. So it's
worried that it was about a relationship.
no, what?
Right.
No. So the process for the newer writers, the newer authors, and then Jane, it's probably was different depending upon when the first book came out. But how did you approach getting an agent, a book agent, a literary agent, and what was that process like? And did it happen quickly, or did it take a while for you to get an agent to shop your book or books?
Well, I'm going to quickly answer only because I'm nowhere near as brilliant as these guys here. But I had been doing a perfume for your competitor, which was this romantic fragrance, and I kept thinking in my marketing mind that there should maybe be a book about what's romantic. So I'm really embarrassed to say I wrote a book called was A Guide to Romantic Living. Anyway, at first I thought, well, I can't write this by myself. So a girlfriend of mine who's a major novelist said, I'll come and help you write it. So we're doing it together, and then I'm reading what she's writing as opposed to what I'm writing, and I'm going, wait a minute, this is sounds straight out of Oxford University, quotes from here, quotes from there. That's not me, it's not authentic, that's not what it is. So I said, thank you very much, gave her a check and said bye-bye. And then I just sat down and thought, okay, well now I've got to write this thing. So I met with the publisher in New York, Susan Ginsburg, and I'll never forget this. And she's looking and said, well, it's pretty good. She said, but this page here, there's this. Hold one second. She said, I've just got to go and take a call. I'll be right back. And so I looked at it. She was gone. I rewrote the whole thing, and she came back in and she said, "What's that?" And I said, "I just read." She read it, looked at me, took it away. She said, "You just wrote that?" I said, "Yes, I did." She said, "You did? You just." Okay, well then this page here, and then she went on. Anyway, basically, I rewrote the book in front of her. She then, it came out and did very well, and I realized I could actually write, and I really didn't need somebody else to write it for me. In fact, it was much better when I did pretty much myself. But she then went on to become an agent. So years later, when James Keach and I decided we wanted to do some children's books called This One and That One about the Malibu cats who lived in California, and we were doing that, he, without knowing, had gone to look for an agent, and the agent he came back with was the one who had been my publisher. So she is my agent, publisher. She is amazing, and I'm so glad to have been at least a little part of the world that you guys are in.
Yeah.
So
That's a nice story.
how did you find your publisher?
So my publisher, believe it or not, so when I met the hyper-literate intellectual powerhouses of Tupelo Press in the woods of Williamstown, Massachusetts, with all these crazy, interesting people, there was a very strange guy whose name is Cutter Strebe, who lived in Wyoming, rode horses, hyper-literate, and he was also I would say like an internet genius, and knew all about social media, publishing houses, and this whole technology world, doesn't escape me actually, but I'm always struggling to catch up. And he had this sort of combined skill set of understanding writing, writers, poetry, editors, presses, and we just clicked. and he became my agent, and it was serendipity, I think, and he's been terrific.
So I had 3 really big agents sort of interested at the same time, and then one that I really thought I was going to end up with and eventually didn't. And knowing how long it was going to take to do the whole agent shopping process again, how long they take to get back, how long they take to, give feedback and all of that, I just ended up submitting to She Writes, which is Spark Press, which is the young adult arm of She Writes, and they're a hybrid company, and I went with them, and that was just, I just didn't want to take, another 5, 6, 7 years of waiting to hear back from agents.
Wonderful. I think, because we don't want to keep wonderful Nan too much longer, the final question is here was, what is the connection, and of course I know this, but I'm, it's not being asked to me, what is the connection between Christy and Jane? How do you two know each other?
She was shooting Harry Wild in Dublin, Ireland, and we have a hotel in Ireland called Kilkee Castle, and I was having my You Think program there, which was the mentorship program for kids from 13 to 18, an immersive art experience for them. An actor who was working with her on Harry Wild, his name Alan Devine, told her about You Think, and she had done something, she had something like that as well, a youth inspired mentorship program. And he invited her, and she said she would come, and everybody didn't believe it. No one believed she was coming. And she came, and we kind of had a connection. Then I gave her my big, huge, fat manuscript, and she still didn't. I still didn't scare her away, and then so we've been friends now for over a year, I think, right?
Yeah, about that.
Yeah.
And we connect on so many different levels too. I mean, we're both actresses and produce, and now she's written this amazing book. I spent a lot of time around horses, not just in that series I did, DQ. I've done a lot of things where I've had to ride horses or be around horses. I love horses. But I'm kind of scared of horses, especially since my dear friend Christopher Reeve had his accident. But they are magnificent, they're extraordinary, and anyway, Christy and I just had a lot in common. We're parents and lots of other things, and the whole giving back thing, and what I connected on this book so much is that one of the things I do is I have a philanthropic arm of my life, which is based on what my mother's philosophy was. She survived 3.5 years in a concentration camp in Indonesia under the Japanese in World War II. And could never really talk about it, but she talked about how in life everyone has challenges, and when they do, they close off their heart, and it's like they have an LP record with a scratch in it and just can't get past it. And I recognize that in Reese. She had a scratch in a story and she couldn't get past it, and her father couldn't get past it, and everyone she encounters has that record going with a scratch in it. And this and my mother's whole thing was how you have to learn to accept, which is the hardest thing to do in life, and somehow reach out in some way to help someone else from your unique perspective, and then you have purpose. And she always said that when you have purpose in life, you can move forward, and that's what I felt was really very much a big part of this book. That's why I love this so much, And I just, I suppose one of my things in life, I love doing what I do for a living, but one of the things that really gives me joy is when I feel I can help empower people and help people from a perspective or something that I have been through, or I can, as I do with the philanthropy, is find research and find organizations that fit what we want to do and sort of curate it for people who want to give back so that they can trust us, they can get involved, and we can make a difference in so many different areas. So that's I think we have a lot in common.
We do, yeah.
That's wonderful. More to come. Well, I think unless there's a burning question, maybe even I see a publishing and PR executive over here, Shannon, beautiful Shannon. But unless there's another question, we will have books for sale. They'll be signing the books here, and we'll also have books at East End Books, Ptown, later, signed copies in case you come later to get them. So we'll have them in Boston as well. Any closing remarks from any of our otherwise?
Thanks for coming out.
Thank you.
Yes,
Okay, thanks very much.
Everyone online, and if there's anyone that you know is one of my followers that's now heard so much about the truth about horses, I would like to hear your review of the truth about horses.
Ooh, thanks.
Great.
That'd be nice. Yeah, that would be nice.
And actually, the review about the
And the
Oculus.
Oculus, why
Yes.
not?
Why not?
Okay, we'll look for that. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.